the main focus why I wanted to do this interview was because I feel like we see things on the media, like we see things on TV, we see things on Instagram, but our news doesn't really reflect everything that I feel is actually happening in the States in regards to the African Americans and racial issues right there in the moment. So I was like, it'd be good to have a discussion with someone who actually is on base in a sense and has a more broader knowledge than we probably do down here. Because our focus, because we did Black Lives Matter marches as well, but our focus was more in regards to the Aboriginals and the police brutality in regards to them. So I was like, it'd be good to get like a starter of where the Black Lives Matter movement actually started and what that looks like for the Americans in a sense, and get that knowledge as well. So I thought it would be really nice to actually discuss it with you and stuff. So yeah. So before we get into the nitty gritties, we'll do a little intro. Who are you? Who is Claudia?
Man, so I am a professional speaker. I'm a writer, currently the online content manager for Message Magazine. And I am just super passionate about speaking to people about race, about God, about social justice. And I just believe that so much of, our social relations, our politics, our theology are intertwined together. And I try to do my best to kind of illuminate that, educate on that, and be an advocate and activist around kind of changing that. And, how can we get more people on board to kind of dismantle these systems, dismantle these narratives, dismantle these institutions and structures that are, very directly targeting people of color for the purpose of keeping them disenfranchised. And so if we can change these narratives, if we can change these systems, if we can change our theologies and the way that we think about God and the way that we think about others, I truly believe that we can change racism and the kind of racial tension that we see, not just here in the States, but I think around the world.
So I'll get into the first question.
Okay.
So basically you're asking me like, what are we seeing so that you understand where you can direct the answers to in a sense. So for us, basically, whatever is on social media. So if social media wasn't there, we'll be like a media blackout in a sense.
Okay.
I think the news, from news perspective, I think they only tell us like if something major. So when you guys had your protest, I think the one in LA, we saw that one. Not protest, so your march, sorry, your Black Lives Matter march. When those were on, we saw a few of those on news. Because of course for them, but their angle is more like, oh, protesting during COVID, is it safe? Like that. That is the angle we get, in a sense that, and that's the same thing they did when we did our march. It was like, oh, is it safe for you guys to be out? And what other numbers of COVID, cases are going to be coming out? In a sense, they didn't really direct it. You would have to read an article to get the actual stories about police brutality in Australia, let alone in America, in a sense. So you'd have to actually do the search yourself.
So you're not actually getting the details of cases. So you're not getting names like this person died, this is what happened under these circumstances, kind of a thing.
Only that's something like only an article. So you would have to like pick up a newspaper or go to like abc.com, news.com, whatever, or social media. That's something literally social media. Because anytime anyone passed away and stuff like that, or was killed, not even passed away, was killed, social media was the first people to tell us, and then of course we would reshare and do what everyone else is doing, basically, in a sense of expanding the news. But other than that, I haven't really, like, you see like one snippet, but it's not really like, it's not on mainstream TV in a sense. So that's my understanding of it anyway, because I haven't seen it on TV unless I'm watching the wrong channel. But yeah, that's how we see things. So I would like to know, in regards to, for you, what does the climate actually look like for you guys right now? Because I know a lot has happened in the last week, let alone. You've been through it, like I'm not gonna lie, and I've been through it like with you guys, like watching social media and stuff. I was like, it's been a lot. So I'm like, what is it? What does it actually feel like being on ground in a sense?
Man, so I'll start with that question. What does it feel like? Man, it feels like morning here. Like it feels like night. Here, to be, at least as a Black person in America, it feels heavy, it feels dark, it feels very helpless, it feels very hopeless. Because it seems as though we are in a constant state of mourning. That's why I started with that word. It feels like we're in a constant state of mourning. Someone is always dying. And not only is someone always dying, but we are watching them die on our timelines. Literally. So social media for us isn't just kind of like seeing the protests, seeing the highlights. You know, Philando Castile, his girlfriend was Facebook Live while they were being stopped by the police. Their 4-year-old daughter was in the back seat. And while she's on Facebook Live, he was shot in the car. Right. And so it's like you're on your timeline and you're scrolling and you don't know what you're seeing a lot of times at first. So a lot of it comes just like, oh man, like what is this? And then you see somebody die. And so that's oftentimes a lot of what happens. And that is extremely overwhelming. It's extremely overwhelming. I would say that the conversation around police brutality particularly picked up around 2012 with the case of Trayvon Martin. So Trayvon Martin was a teenager. I believe he was 15 or 16 at the time. He was leaving his father's house in Florida. And he was going to like a corner store to get iced tea and Skittles. And he was wearing a hoodie, as I actually am wearing now. And basically on his trip back, as he's walking back in his father's neighborhood back home, one of his father's neighbors, a gentleman named George Zimmerman, who saw himself kind of as community watchman, basically shot him dead, found him to be a threat of some kind. From that point, that was when 3 individuals made the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Now, to be clear, Trayvon Martin was not the first case of police brutality. Here in the States, we have a very long history of what we call lynching. And between around 1865 to about 1965, Black people could be hung from trees for absolutely any reason at any point in any time. And so that ultimately has transformed into what we now see to be police brutality. And so oftentimes when you hear speeches or if you read op-eds and different things like this about police brutality, they will oftentimes make that correlation between police brutality and lynching. They will talk about the Trayvon Martins, but they will also talk about Emmett Till. And so there are a variety of cases where Black people, but Black men in particular, have kind of been targeted and what feels like exterminated on American soil for no other reason than being Black. And so 3 women, Patrice Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi, started an organization or started a movement called Black Lives Matter. And it was birthed out of a tweet that I believe Patrice Cullors made, where she had wrote this statement on her Facebook and basically kind of ended it with this hashtag Black Lives Matter. And basically Black Twitter, as we like to call them here in the States, kind of took hold of it and really just everyone started tweeting it. Everyone started using the hashtag. And so come 2014, we get the deaths of Eric Gardner. We get the deaths of Mike Brown. Mike Brown particularly touched me because he died in a place called Ferguson, Missouri. And when the officer shot and killed him, they left him laying in the concrete for about 4 hours, uncovered. They shot him, drove off, and that was the end of the conversation. His dead body was just laying there for 4 hours, right? And so for us, it's not even so much about, are you in the middle of stealing something? Are you in the middle of committing a crime? Are you in the middle of doing something devious? You can be taking a walk. You can be sitting in your car. It can be a traffic stop. Philando Castile was shot in a traffic stop. Sandra Bland was shot in a traffic stop. Tamir Rice, 12-year-old boy in Ohio, was playing with a toy gun in a park. Cops pulled up to the park and shot him dead in the playground, only to then realize he's a 12-year-old boy with a toy gun, right? Jordan Davis was shot because he was playing loud music in his car. A young woman was confronted at a university because she fell asleep in her library. And they confronted her, accosted her as though she was not a student in spite of having student ID. So there is just there's a feeling in the air of a lack of safety, that if you are Black, you genuinely cannot live your life. You cannot take a walk. You cannot go to the store. You cannot go to a park. And when we come to 2020, we come to Ahmaud Arbery and you cannot take a jog. And so Ahmaud Arbery is taking a jog. He is shot not by the cops, but by vigilante people, just random white people that thought he was a threat, thought he was stealing something, right? Then you come to Breonna Taylor, a woman in Louisville, Kentucky, who was shot in her home, sleep. She was an EMT worker, was working on the front lines with the coronavirus, COVID-19. She was finally off, sleeping. Police burst through her door at between 12 and 1 a.m., no knock, no warrant, and shoot her dead because they thought that she and her house were a part of a drug raid. Mind you, that police department had already apprehended who they were looking for the day before. So where is the lack of communication within your department that you not only have who you're currently looking for, but then you go in and you bust in the wrong house, right? Tatiana Jefferson was playing video games in her with her nephew in her grandmother's home, shot dead by police. Botham Jean in his house, on his couch, eating ice cream, watching television. His neighbor thinks that this is her apartment, police officer. She's like, no, this is where I live. She comes in, she supposedly thinks this is her apartment, and so she kills the man that's on the couch because she believes he is an intruder in her home. I'm just simply telling you the facts, right? This is how they spin these narratives here in the States, because a lot of times how you tell what happens to Black people aids in how these police officers get off.
Yeah.
And so the feeling here, like I said, is very overwhelming, very taxing, very tiring. It's like I can't run, I can't walk, I can't sleep in my own bed, I can't eat ice cream, I can't be at my own college campus library. What can I as a Black person do in America safely? And the conversation is always, well, if you were just compliant, just be compliant, just do what they ask. don't be, confrontational, don't have an attitude, don't have a this, don't have a that. It's like a lot of these cases, these officers are killing before even asking questions, before pulling badges, before doing anything. And that's what happened when we see that kind of stuff. It wanes on you. So that when we get to George Floyd in May of this year, and you see that man apprehended for an alleged counterfeit $20 bill, and then he is wrestled to the ground. And then the officers, he has two officers one officer on his back, one officer on his legs, and another officer kneeling on his neck. That officer knelt on his neck with his hands in his pockets for 8 minutes and 46 seconds straight. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever knelt for a full 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but that's a really long time. It's a long time to kneel when somebody's praying. I mean, even an intercessory prayer at church, I remember once you start getting past the 5-minute mark, you start adjusting yourself. Listen, you start trying to, okay, let me get, if I do this, how can I, right?
Literally.
You knelt on a body for almost 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And had this face, this audacity, as though, yeah, I did this and you can't do anything to me about it.
Yeah, no remorse. Yeah.
No remorse. We watched in that live the transition of his life to where he goes from laying there to calling for his dead mother to praying to literally no longer having any breath left in his body. And I think that when you watch something like that, it does something to you. And Black people have for centuries, for decades in this country, been either passing down stories or watching this kind of violence. And every generation has had to explain to their children what's happening, why it's happening. And so when you deal with all that, and then this week, we have such a powerful national march, right? So we all meet at the Lincoln Memorial here in Washington, D.C. Over 200,000 people, white, Black, gay, straight, atheist, Christian, everybody was down there at the memorial, specifically saying enough is enough with this police brutality stuff.
Yeah.
And then to leave that march saying the names of these victims, declaring your commitment to getting engaged locally to make change around police brutality, and to then go home and to then turn your phone on again and be notified that Chadwick Boseman has died of cancer. Black people are constantly processing loss, constantly processing trauma, constantly processing death. So when you ask me, what is the climate? What does it feel like? Man, it feels heavy over here. When trying to figure out, and when just living and being Black.
Yeah, it's hard. I know, like a glimpse of it, because when I was in the States, I remember I was talking to my friends, and as soon as you even start the topic of race, I remember I felt the atmosphere shift, and I was like, oh, like you can feel it, and I'm like, okay, now I know what they mean. But of course, it was only a glimpse because I don't live there in a sense. But
race, because for us, race is not a topic; it's a lived experience.
Yeah.
And so in other countries, because the racial caste system is very different, You know, I've heard different people say different things like, oh, well, yeah, Claudia, like I can control how people perceive me. Yeah, you can do that over there, wherever over there is, right? You can't do that here. I've never been able to control, excuse me, how I am perceived. The moment I walk out of the house, depending on what I have on, depending on what I have done with my hair, depending on what is going on, depends on how I am perceived. So that there are days when I am perceived like immediately, exclusively as a Black woman. There are other days where people are coming up to me asking me, is one of my parents white? Am I Dominican, Spanish, Latin? The whole cultural, social context of relation here in the States is based on my phenotypical appearance. And how I treat you, how I engage with you, what I say to you is intimately attached to who and what I think you are based on what you look like. And that is, for people that maybe aren't born in it and aren't used to it, it's weary, it's burdensome. But it is my lived reality. It is not a choice that I have. And so because of that, and because I bear what one of our scholars here, Kimberly Crenshaw, calls intersectionality. I bear what she calls compounded discrimination. I am both Black and female. When I wake up, the decisions that I make about my makeup, my hair, my clothes, how I speak, where I go, what time of day I go, is somebody with me when I go, how long am I going to be gone, have I told anybody where I'm going, do I have my phone, do I have my ID, do I have multiple different kinds of ID to show that I am, you know, someone of value, right? Like there are so many levels to this thing that it's not just a conversation piece for us. It is very much so life and death. It is employment and unemployment. It is being treated well in a hospital as a patient and not being treated well in a hospital as a patient, right? Why is it that we are constantly in a state of being attacked and being killed? And that is our constant mood. That is why James Baldwin said, to be Black in America is to be in a constant state of rage. Because there is always something coming up. There's always something in the headlines, on your timeline that produces within you a rage. So that we're not, right now, we're not only mad at police brutality. Right now, we're mad with cancer. Because quite frankly, I know all the Christians might, you know, find this problematic, but our king has died.
That's what I said, and someone came for me.
Listen.
I was like, hold on now. But yeah.
Now, luckily, nobody has said anything to me about that, because I think when I made my Chadwick Boseman post on Instagram, you know, all I put is my king underneath his image, and no one has said anything.
You are so lucky.
I think that they are wise to do so. I don't think you want to tap me on that one. I don't think you can tap somebody else. I will drag you if you try and come for my Christianity because I call him my king. Don't do me. I'm not the one. So, and I do think that, and maybe because you guys are in Australia as well, because I think here the climate, nobody is touching anybody's tribute, you know, post, nothing about Black Panther.
Yeah, because I think with us, they don't know that much in regards to what it stands for a Black person. So for us, for me to say, like, forever my king, like, there's a reason why I'm saying that. Where for them, they're like, ain't Jesus our king? And I'm like, I'm like, wait now, wait.
I think even when white people saw what Black Panther did here in the States back in February 2018. I think that, you know, I've seen white people go online and make videos and statements and things like, I completely understand now
Yeah.
why the Black community lit up for that film and why they are like losing it in mourning right now over his death. Like, so nobody's saying anything reckless like, isn't Jesus your king? No one is no one is uttering those kinds of words. All right.
I wish. But
Man.
in regards to, you were talking about lynching to now all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, like the progression from lynching to now bullets and gunshots in a sense. It's like, for me listening to it, it's like we had one weapon, but now with progression, we just added another weapon, or we changed the weapon in a sense to kill Black men in a sense, or to kill Black people. And it's so sad because like, from your, like, because I did African American studies when I was in the States, and you guys have not had a break. Like literally, even from slavery to freedom, there was no breath of air in a sense. Like freedom wasn't even freedom in a sense. Or emancipation wasn't emancipation in a sense. So it's like,
or that's what it was, and that's what a lot of Black scholars say, right? Emancipation was what it was. It was emancipation, but emancipation was not freedom, right?
Yeah. So it's just like, it's a constant like battle in a sense, where you are having to constantly prove yourself but fight for yourself. Like a breath of air is just a fight, like in a sense where you are lucky to breathe that air. And like, yes, I might pray today and be like, oh, thank you, Lord, for the breath in my lungs, but I'm like, you guys literally, it's literally thank you, Lord, for breath in my lungs, because you don't know when someone might just flip and be like, oh, you know, I just want to kill a Black person today, or a police just might see you the wrong way that day. It's like, you just never know. And it's sad. Like, no one should ever have to live in that sense of fear. It's sort of like if you lived in like a war-torn country, in a sense, like Arab country, where you've got terrorists literally walking around. It's literally the same situation. It's literally the same situation in regards that you're not safe as soon as you walk out the door. So it's a civil war without being labeled.
And I think that's, you know, I think that's a very apropos analogy, because I do think that Black people are in war and have been in a war-torn state from the very beginning, right? From 1619. So for 401 years now, we have been in a constant position where there is nothing but kind of trauma, and terrorism. That's really the word that I'm looking for, terrorism. Colonialism most certainly was a global phenomenon, but I think the difference between colonialism, whether that was in the Caribbean or even in India, is that our colonizers stayed with us. So, you know, there's a lot of scholarship about the different kinds of colonialism. I'm not going to give those names. That's not necessary. The point is that when you look at American colonialism, they went, got the slaves, and brought them back home. They didn't go to where the slaves were and then disrupt their current location, identify supervisors, higher ups, establish a kind of hierarchy, and then they go back home trusting that, you know, the Indians or the few whites that are there will maintain the power structures, as you see kind of in the Caribbean and in India, right? What you have in the States is they went, they got, and they brought home. So that today, African Americans or Black people in America make up between 13 to 15% of the total population. White people make up over 60% of the total population. So when people always ask, well, why don't they just revolt? Why don't they just get their independence like we did in Jamaica, or we did in Haiti, or we did in wherever? sis, that's not an option here, right?
In a sense, because it's not necessarily your native country, where it was them. Even with India,
No.
whatever, they were Indians before the white people came. So like it was they could kick them out. Y'all were planted there, so you couldn't really kick. Who you gonna kick?
Who are we kicking where? Who's and to be quite frank, it's not even so much that, so much as it's a majority minority situation.
Mm-hmm.
We are outnumbered. In India, you are the white man is outnumbered. In the Caribbean, the white man is outnumbered. In the States, the black man is outnumbered. That is the situation, right? So that, and then on top of that, even having conversations about, you know, like going, like go where, like where I am
You're
so American.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any voluntary immigrants in my lineage. I have Native American, I have African, and I have white. So I guess the couple of white people that are in there, those are the only voluntary immigrants that are in my line, right? So for that to kind of be a lot of Black people's, you know, narrative, where am I? Go back to what African country? That is not my history. And then on top of that, I don't even have the documentation to prove which African country my ancestor is even from, right? So that was also the other part of that colonialist violence. That many of our narratives have been disrupted, erased, and removed in very strategic ways. And I truly believe that it's that kind of systemic work that keeps Blacks in the States disconnected from their history, from their ancestors, from their family, that permits our disenfranchisement to continue. And so I think that's definitely, you know, just it's all working together here in the States. Like police brutality is not like kind of like a one pin issue. Like, oh man, if we can just fix police brutality, Black people will just be so much better off and they won't be dying on our timelines. It's like, police brutality is the leaf. It is the flower on the leaf of the tree that is white supremacy here in America.
It's what we see. We don't know the underground. We don't know the roots. We can't see the roots, but that's what has blossomed from it. So. No, because in regard to that, as you were saying, talking about like there's a whole system underneath. But in regards to the police, like, are they taught to do that? Like, are they taught to kneel on people? Are they like? I'm like, where do they learn these things from that they all of a sudden just freely shooting people? Like,
So that's a great question. Like, are the police trained to do this? Right? If you talk to police officers here, particularly Black police officers here in the States, they will tell you outright, even white police officers will tell you outright, what we are calling excessive force is permitted, right? So there are definitely moments in time when police officers need to exercise what is called excessive force in the apprehension of a suspect, right? But what many officers are clear about is that chokeholds, knees on the neck, and immediately shooting offhand is not a part of training. You're actually not trained to do that. You are trained to do a series of de-escalating moves, tactics, exercises, long before you are supposed to get to excessive force. But what we have to really kind of understand here with the history of policing in America is that the police were literally the slave patrols. So police did not exist here in the States for a while. What existed was slave patrols. Individuals who had the same kind of sheriff's star that you see, you know, in pictures, only it said slave patrol instead of police. And those individuals' job was solely to go and find fugitive slaves and bring them back to their masters. The ones that they could not bring back were killed. But the reason why you did not want to do that is because to kill a slave was to kill someone else's property, right? That's a loss of money. So a slave patroller cannot destroy someone else's property and not have some kind of a legal situation. You need to be able to explain why you lost me that money as a slave owner, right? So their sole purpose is that. So when you're talking about the history of law and order in America, and you're talking about police systems and police structures here in the States, you are talking about slave patrols. So that no matter the long evolution, let's say, suggesting that, hey, you know, we've gotten rid of slave patrols, and no, we are providing policing to all communities. Well, here in the States, there are several communities that are not heavily policed. Those communities are predominantly white. Those communities are predominantly affluent, right? So that if you go to very affluent white communities here in the States, it's little to zero police presence, right? If you then go to low income communities that have, you know, government housing, are predominantly exclusively Black, you have multiple police in there stationed on corners. You've got helicopters circling. There is a constant nonstop police presence. So where does that come from, right? That brings us back to that conversation of why is there this over policing of Black communities and a little to no policing of white communities. And this is also why there's a tension here in the States between whites and Blacks around policing, because white people have never experienced the kind of policing that Black people have experienced.
Yeah.
So in their minds, you know, the sheriff, the police officer, I know him by name. I see him every once in a while. When I have a dispute or an issue, I call him. Joe comes by the house. He helps me deal with whatever the situation is, and Joe leaves, right? When my kid makes a mistake out in the community, Joe picks him up. Joe picks up my kid, brings my kid back home and says, hey, Joey was out there with those kids and they were doing blase, blase. They were stealing, they were vandalizing such and such. You know, I broke them up and I brought Joey back home, right? So that's what that situation is. In Black communities, if my Black son goes out and does something, that police officer is not gonna bring my Black son back home to me and say, you know, Miss Allen, you know, we saw your son out, you know, they were vandalizing, they were doing some illegal graffiti, you know, we broke them up, you know, we brought them back here. Even if my son is 12 or 13 years old, there is the large chance that he will be shot. If not shot, actively arrested, brought in to a police station and booked. So there is a huge differentiation between how Black people are policed in this country and how white people are policed in this country.
Yeah, that goes to a whole nother white privilege conversation, which we don't have time for.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. But it's a lot. It's like, oh. But that leads me to my second question, which you sort of have answered in a sense, where I asked, what information is the wider world being misinformed about? Because there were a few names that you mentioned, and a few stories that you mentioned before that I was like, I've never heard of that person. So we only get a select few of stories, in a sense, probably the ones that probably get the most media coverage. In regards to that, but we also heard, I think recently it was Jacob Black with his situation where he got shot.
Jacob Blake.
Jacob Blake, sorry. And he was shot in the sense that, give me the full story, because I didn't understand like the full story, because I know we probably didn't get all. I know he was shot, it was like 7 times in the back, roughly. Oh, I don't want to give you false information. And now he is paralyzed in hospital. But by the grace of God, he's alive. That's a win already, enough as it is.
For sure.
So can you give me some sort of a backstory? Because I don't think we're that informed on his story in a sense. So.
Sure. So Jacob Blake is in Wisconsin. This happened in the state of Wisconsin. And allegedly, there were two white women who were actually fighting. They were in a physical altercation. He then went to break up that altercation. The police are called. The police show up on the scene, and they do not question the white women. They don't, say anything to them. They immediately start questioning Jacob Blake. And so they're talking with him, different things like that. He then proceeds to leave, get in his car. His sons are actually in the back seat of the vehicle. He goes to get in the car. The police officer grabs his shirt and shoots him 7 times in the back, point blank range. His 3 sons in the back, or I won't say 3, but I feel like it's 3, but he has sons that are sitting in the back. So they see their father shot 7 times in the back, and one of them actually is celebrating a birthday on that very day. And so Jacob Blake's father, Jacob Blake, was actually senior, is driving up to see his son and grandkids. And that's when he receives this call, this notification that his son has been shot like this. And he said that when he got to the hospital, he said that he saw 8 holes in his son's body. So, those are kind of the hard facts of the case. Now, I've been hearing and noticing that the news is now suggesting that potentially Jacob Blake had gone back to the car because he was reaching for a knife that was supposedly in the passenger seat of the car. So again, these are the kinds of narratives that they spin to justify, oh, well, this is why I shot him 7 times, because he was reaching for a knife. Well, many are like, well, if you have a gun, if you're the one that's bringing a gun to a knife fight and you're the police officer, even if he had a knife, you should be able to de-escalate that situation, get the knife from him, he not be dead or shot 7 times in the back. For us in the Black community here, we feel like Jake ain't have no knife, no knife on the passenger seat of the car, because we are coming from having a history of the police always putting evidence on Black bodies that they did not have. So there are stories where police officers have stopped individuals and they've put drugs in the car of the individual and then arrested him. So because we have this knowledge in our heads of, well, police officers can't be trusted because police officers plant drugs, police officers plant weapons. So if there is a weapon that you found, I don't think Jacob had it, right? So, people will often say here in the States, well, we need to find out all the facts. We have to wait for all the facts. For us, it's not even so much about waiting for the facts, because so often the facts are attached to what the police say happened. And from our experience, the police have made things up to legitimize whatever their actions were, yea, even, sanction whatever was done. And so, now, as a result of the Jacob Blake situation, a protest erupted in a place called Kenosha, Wisconsin. Okay. And so this is all kind of happening around the Milwaukee area. So Jacob Blake is shot in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, and this protest erupts kind of in Kenosha. You've got some peaceful protesters going on and happening. And then there's a young white 17-year-old named Kyle Rittenhouse, who technically does not live in Wisconsin. Okay. Kyle lives in Illinois. All right. And Kyle travels, his mother driving him, with an AR-15 to the protest. So first of all, it is illegal for you to cross state lines with an automatic rifle. One. So he's technically not. Secondly, he's not old enough to carry an automatic rifle. Felony 2, right? Now, he gets there open carrying this automatic rifle with all these police officers, and nobody stops him. Nobody finds Kyle to be a threat. Nobody finds Kyle to be problematic. Nobody asks where Kyle's from. Nobody asks why Kyle is coming here, because there was, at the time, I guess, some militia that had formed. A white militia had formed in that Wisconsin area, and they were coming to help the police to man the protesters. All right. And Kyle is, claiming that he is a part of this militia. So that Kyle actually was served refreshments before and after the shooting. Kyle was walking down the street having shot people. And the protesters, people were yelling to the police like, yo, that's the shooter. That's the shooter. And the police officers are not doing anything. They're not apprehending him. They're not talking to him. Nothing is happening. Right? So there is a lot of so Kyle opens fire on the protesters, kills 2 people and injures some others. The 2 people that he killed were white men. And one of the individuals, that the reason why they died is because they were trying to disarm him. So when we have conversations here in the States about the police feel threatened, right? It is oftentimes infuriating for us as Black people, because you don't feel threatened when white people are open carrying automatic rifles, but you feel threatened when Black people are sitting in cars, laying in beds, running, walking, when they're actively unarmed. So you are actually more threatened, more afraid of unarmed Black people than you are of militia automatic rifle carrying white people, right? So that this is why the conversation is not about whether or not the police feel threatened, whether or not the police actually even are threatened. The conversation is around the fact that here in the States, there is still an inherent bias. There is this implicit bias, this inherent belief that Black people are criminal, that your skin in and of itself is a weapon. Your being in and of itself is a threat. Yeah. And so because of that, I'm now going to shoot and ask questions later and realize you were a child and realize you were innocent and realize, I completely over exaggerated a situation. But hey, I'm a police officer. And so I've got to, I'm going to make mistakes. And so that's one of the issues that we have here, is that police officers, they can do these killings and they rarely get indicted. They rarely get arrested. They rarely get indicted. They rarely get sentenced. They rarely get punished. They oftentimes get put on administrative leave, paid administrative leave. Nothing goes on their record as having done a killing of this nature. And then they oftentimes move to another county or to another district and policed there, if they have to move at all. And that is infuriating. And it's why the killings persist, because all you're doing is moving bodies. Bodies that have racist ideas, racist thoughts. In the same way that we watch Black bodies die, we watch white people get calmly apprehended. We've seen videos where white people, a white man, I saw a white man was naked, had multiple weapons and was running around and had actively killed, I think, 7 people that day. Like, not a suspect, murdered 7 people definitely, they knew it was him. When they found him, they did not use any excessive force whatsoever in his apprehension. He was gathered, he was sat down, and he was arrested. We've seen them deal with even cases of mental illness with white people. And those individuals are not shot and killed. So when you watch, we've watched white people just be mad. Like not have a mental illness, not have killed anybody. White people just get to be mad, and they can hit the police, and they can kick the police and beat the police, and there's all this tussle and all this wrestling and all this active fighting, and nobody is shot. But I'm sitting in a vehicle with my seatbelt on, and I'm currently bleeding to death because you shot me, right? So that kind of a conflicting, contrasting image for us is why we genuinely do not feel as though this is a couple of bad apples. This is not, they just need some implicit bias training. No, this is a systemic issue that requires significant legislative overhaul, because there has been a just a nonstop violence and the word that you really used prior to terrorism against Black people here in this country from the get.
Yeah, and it just goes to, like, as you were talking about how, like, being Black or being a Black male, it seems as a weapon. And from my understanding, that's how they saw Black men way back when, like, from history. If you see a Black, that man can kill you. That's how they had that same mindset. Like, if you see a Black man, he can take your woman, he can, steal her and do whatever. And it's like, hold on, that's not the truth. You don't know this person from anything. And all of a sudden you give them all of a sudden a whole persona, a whole stereotype. It's like, and the thing is, like, yes, you're so right. It's so systematic in the sense that it has been there since the jump. Like, and my fear in regards to, like, hearing things like they're gonna make people so what's the word, desensitized to Black deaths because it's happening so constantly that there'll be a time where people are like, oh yeah, that's old news. And I'm like, and that's my biggest fear.
I can guarantee you that won't happen.
Please.
Because if it's been happening for 400 years, like, that's not gonna happen, right? I think that the fear that I have is there is going to come a time where Black people will stop fighting for equality and in fact will start working for revenge. And right now, we are not seeking revenge. And that is the fear that white people have. The fear that white people have is that Black people are going to wake up one morning and begin to treat them the way that they have treated us. And so the fact is, we have actually not done anything that they have stereotyped or narrated us as. And as a people, we have been very intentional about fighting those narratives, right? From the moment that we got out of slavery, we were constantly battling this narrative of being lazy, this narrative of wanting to sleep with and rape white women. No one wanted to rape white women. What was happening was your white men were raping our Black women. Right?
And the white woman were taking advantage of the Black men too.
Of the Black man, right? So literally everything that they have done to us, they have spun it around and created a fear narrative to suggest that that's what we want to do to them, when there's literally no historical evidence depicting that Black bodies have done any of the things that they are afraid that we will do. And so that is why, poets like Langston Hughes, have suggested, that, the Black people are sweet and docile, meek and mild. I wish I could remember it now, but basically he says, I pray that you don't come to the day where, you know, we cease to be those things. And what we actually seek to do is to do to you what you've done to us. There's a video that went viral over some protests that happened in, where was it? I can't remember where in the States, but it was surrounding the George Floyd case. And she did this phenomenal rant because people were asking, you know, why are Black people burning down their own communities? These riots are, you know, so unnecessary. You can't do this, blah, 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 blah. And she broke down how we own nothing in this country. Nothing. So that when you say, why are Black people burning down their communities? Black people were burning down the Arby's. Okay, that's a fast food restaurant, the McDonald's, like the KFC, like they were burning down the CVS, the Walgreens, the pharmacy, the grocery stores. Like that's what they were burning down. They were not burning down anything that they owned. Now, is it productive action? No. Because at the end of the day, right, like you do live in that community. So now because you, even though you don't own these things and you are angry, I mean, you are furious. Like, I get it. But now there are people in the community that can't eat anything because you burned down the fast food joints. You burned down the grocery stores. You burned down the pharmacy. But at the same time, it is very difficult when you have people who have been constantly oppressed, and then you ask them to act rationally to irrational behavior. If you are going to act irrationally and you are going to provoke me with your irrational behavior, then do not come to me and say that I have to now be rational when you didn't have to be. You're not being rational. Rational is waiting for me to pull out my license and registration and not shooting me in the back while I'm pulling it out. You know what I'm saying? So in America, we have this fascination with always pointing out the quote unquote irrational behavior of Black people in response to violence. But we rarely want to call out the irrational behavior of white people who are enacting white terror and white supremacy. And so this is why Dr. King said that riots are the language of the unheard, because they are always what it's like. You see those memes on social media where it's like we took a knee and you got mad, we protested and you got mad, we signed petitions, you got mad, we sang songs, you got mad. We do all this non-violent action, you get mad. But when I burn down buildings, now you want us to have a conversation in council. Okay, well, if that's what it takes, then I'm gonna burn down buildings. And so what this woman was saying was that sometimes this is what is necessary for our people in order to even be noticed, in order to even have a conversation. And we are so economically depraved because we not only don't own anything, but our communities are what we call here redlined, meaning that government officials draw a red line around certain communities on maps, and they intentionally do not funnel various resources into those communities, right? That's been happening since the 60s and 70s. So you have red line communities, you have what we'll call quote unquote ghettos, or low income working communities where you have individuals who are more than likely on government housing, on government assistance. Many of them are unemployed, right? So you have these communities that are economically disenfranchised and are actively in these incubators that have no means of getting access to resources whatsoever. And so that kind of compressed unemployment, compressed trauma, compressed police brutality, compressed lack of education, compressed mental illness, right? You put all of that in one thing, yeah, you're gonna get some violence, right? If there's you don't build any grocery stores in there, the only thing you have in there are liquor stores and corner stores. So everybody in there is not eating anything good, they're just eating sugar, alcohol, and soda. So all of that on a poor diet, and then you want to come in and do the police brutality thing again, you're going to get riots.
Yeah.
That is going to be the natural human reaction. And what she was saying is that even in our riots, Black people are seeking equality and not revenge. And
Yeah.
my fear is not that we as a people will be desensitized here in the States. My fear is that we will find ourselves in an actual race war here in the States. Black people fighting Black people, Black people fighting white people, Black people killing white people out of the anger, rage, and dissatisfaction that is associated with 400 years of non-stop terrorism.
Yeah.
That's my fear.